Thank you all for coming, and I know people will be filing in as we go. So I'm Kathleen Johnston. I'm the director of the Michael I. Arnold Center for Investigative Journalism, and welcome to Indiana University and to our first, we hope, annual symposium for investigative journalism. And, last spring, we got a new Arnold Center board. And one of the things the board wanted was an annual event to showcase not just the center, but the importance of investigative journalism, particularly in our democracy. We're in fragile times right now. And the board really thought this would be a good way to showcase not just the work of the center, and we hope you go on arnoldcenter.org and look at some of the work of the students, but you'll see some of the terrific journalists we have today. Just going to take a couple minutes here. We couldn't hold this event without our sponsors. So I want to give a shout out to the Scripps Howard Foundation, Lumina Foundation, Gannett USA Today. Now, Sarah, you can shout later. The Hoosier State Press Association, the Hoosier State Press Association Foundation, Indiana Citizen. Are they here yet? I think they're coming here. Indiana Pro Chapter of SBJ, and the Hutton Honors College at IU. And we have a lot of partners in the journalism business also supporting us, and they're on the back of your program. So, we couldn't do it without them, so we appreciate it. And later today, I'm going to tell you about the center, but I want to acknowledge my thanks first to our namesake, Michael Arnold. Where's Michael? He's probably hiding in the back. Michael, you're in the back, aren't you? Yeah. So we couldn't have had this center without Michael's founding endowment. We could use more money, and I wouldn't be a director if I didn't say that. So I got it penciled in like 4 times today to say that. So our schedule's outlined in the program. We have 2 panels of investigative journalists. The first are going to talk about sports, but I think they're going to tell you all journalism is investigative, and we really don't silo it that way, but these guys happen to have a little niche in that and have done some terrific reporting. And my friend Erica Henry from CNN is going to introduce them in a moment and tell you about them. The second panel is going to be about investigative journalism in a polarized world. It's tough out there for journalists. It's tough out there for everybody, right? But our jobs are a little harder. It just means we have to work harder and think smarter, and do things better. And then we'll have a mixer. This is the age of COVID, so we're going to try to do this. We're going to move everybody after the second panel into the Commons, and you can meet the journalists. And I hope you also meet some of our board members who, if you look at their resumes, they're pretty great journalists themselves. And so this is an opportunity, especially for the students, to ask people, anything you want about investigative journalism or their journalism jobs, and do they have a job for you? I see which one's the first one of you guys that asked that question. And then we're going to end our evening with my friend and former colleague Sarah Seidner from CNN. She's going to give the keynote tonight. So I'm going to ask you one thing. If you're eating or drinking, you can take your mask off, but it's IU's policy to have a mask on. Obviously, our presenters are not going to have it so you can hear them. I happen to be from the region. I tend to mumble, so I have to take my mask off when I'm talking. These guys are a little better speakers than I am, but please keep your mask on when you can, all right? And Erica, it's all yours.
So I just wanted, is this on? I just wanted to thank you, Kathleen, for having me to moderate this panel. And some of us, we were in a board meeting earlier today, and one of the board members, Charlene Brown, she mentioned the importance of inspiring students here. And if you're talking about sports journalism, these 3 people to my left are really the perfect panel to inspire you guys. Like, I look at their bios and I'm just blown away by what these 3 people have done and continue to do. So we're going to have a conversation, but you are so fortunate to have our panelists here, and so you can see the microphones on both sides, and so I really implore you guys to, at some point, you know, ask questions, okay? So, you know, like I said, we'll have a conversation, but we thought that we would leave enough time for you guys to ask questions, because we feel like that will be interactive, and then you guys will be a part of the conversation. So start thinking of your questions now. So I know we all have the booklet that has everyone's bio in it, but our panelists today are Marissa Kwiatkowski. She's an investigative reporter at USA Today, and I'm sure you are all familiar with her work that she's done with you know, really getting into that gymnastics story. So thank you so much for being here. And then we have Steve Rich, who's a database editor for the investigations unit at the Washington Post. Steve has his BA in communication at Virginia Tech, and is also has a degree for an MA in journalism, and he too has a host of awards. And then we have Tisha Thompson, who is an investigative and enterprise reporter for ESPN. You've seen her work on all different platforms, and she works on SportsCenter, Outside the Lines, ESPN.com, the ESPN Daily Podcast, and has appeared in the ESPN magazine. So thank you all for being here.
Can we talk about you?
My bio's in here. And
Well, this is a pretty powerful lady here on the right. So let's not underestimate how amazing it is that you're taking time out of your day when you have a lot of things to be worrying about right now. So truly, I want to just give her.
So this is a question that I'll ask to each one of you. Why sports? Why sports? Why investigative sports journalism?
Why are you looking at me? I guess I made the big move formally into sports, which I guess is why you're looking at me, because you can go back to regular news occasionally. But about 5 years ago, I made a move to ESPN after doing, I would call traditional news journalism, investigative journalism. I find sports a fascinating, unexplored territory for investigative reporting. I made the move in part for sports, but I made the move for ESPN. I thought, and continue to think, ESPN is doing some of the best investigative reporting that's out there. And I think sports is underestimated because people think it's a game. They think it's fun. Everyone's a fan, but it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that rarely is examined to the full extent that we examine other multi-billion-dollar businesses. Is that a good answer? Yeah, okay. A+. Okay, thank you.
Steve.
I really like doing investigative reporting in sports because, for a lot of the same reasons as Tisha, I mean, it is a very undercovered area. It does affect a lot of people, and the money, it comes from a lot of people. I think a lot of folks will be like, well, I don't even like sports, so why should I care? Well, a lot of these teams and leagues are getting your money, your taxpayer dollars, whether you want them to or not, and so it is worthy of investigation, and it's worthy to keep probing them, because many of the people who are writers about these tend not to do those things. A lot of them do, but in many cases you will find that they don't, and so it's really good to have reporters out there investigating what is a massive part of our society.
Marissa?
So I guess I wouldn't consider myself a sports investigative reporter, at least not in the traditional sense, although a lot of the work that I've done has touched on that realm. Really where my passion lies is investigating institutions and how they respond to people. And people are really the focal point of all of the things that I've done throughout my career, both relating to sports and not. And I think that, you know, going back to what Tisha was talking about, you know, these aren't just sports entities that we enjoy watching, you know, the teams play. These are people's lives, and you have, you know, tens of thousands, in some cases millions of people who are involved in one way or another, and that has a very real impact on those people's lives. So, you know, I think when I think about the work that all of us have done, it's bigger than just about a game and bigger than just one sort of piece of it. It's about people and, in my case, a lot of the work I've done about the safety of people in sports.
So you all kind of touched on it. Big money, lots and lots of money in sports, but not so much accountability. Why?
As I'm sure many of the students who have taken investigative reporting here have learned, you can get a lot of information if you gain a skill set where you can file Public Information Act requests and request public documents and use government agencies to find out information about companies and other individuals that are private entities because they're doing business with the government. A lot of professional sports in particular, not necessarily state universities, but professional sports is private, and it's that way on purpose so that you don't have to turn over records to the government. Just last week I was working on an NFL team that you may have read about who was having some hearings on Capitol Hill, and the NFL voluntarily gave up its special tax status in 2015, in part because it didn't have to report salaries of its employees anymore. So it gave up saving a lot of money that it was getting through a special tax exemption that was granted to it by Congress, so it didn't have to report information to the public anymore. That sort of speaks to the challenges that come with reporting on sports. It's a very savvy group of people. It's a really smart group of people who don't have to tell anybody what they're doing behind closed doors. Not everybody, but an awful lot of folks. But there are ways around it. It's a little extra challenging, but that for me is fun. You know, I like the puzzle of investigative reporting. It's not the sole reason I do it by any stretch of the imagination, but it's why I'm still doing it, I think, is it makes my brain work. I have to figure out, well, okay, I can't get it that way, so how am I going to figure out how to get it? And that brainstorm of, you put this wall up, I'm going to figure out a way around that wall.
So when the NFL lost or gave up its nonprofit status, Roger Goodell was making $40 million a year, and I genuinely do think that that's why they gave it up, is because we knew that, and now they can sort of pay whoever they want, whatever they want, and go and fly under the radar. But I think one of the reasons why there's so little accountability in sports is because people love sports and people love their teams, but there is that old adage in journalism, which is if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And I think that applies to sports. I mean, I think that, you know, I went to Virginia Tech for undergrad. I love the Hokies. I would very happily report on them if somebody gave me a tip. And I think that a lot of people can't fathom that. They don't want to bring down their own teams because they root for them. And so I think some of it has to do with that. It's just people, we're fans. A lot of us are fans of teams, and I think it's inappropriate for us to say, I'll investigate this, this, and this, but not this team that I like. And so I think that maybe that's not the full mindset in everyone, but I think that's a huge reason why sports end up being undercovered from an investigative standpoint.
To follow up on that thought process, because I do work for a company that wants fans. We need fans. Fans are our bread and butter. And so there is this question of, well, you know, why are you doing the story on my team? And I'm a mom, and I often think about, I love my child. I desperately love my child, but I'm not going to let my kid go hit someone. I'm not going to let my kid go hurt someone. I need to discipline my child. I need to explain to my child what they've done wrong. And I'm not by any stretch of the imagination equating fandom to childhood, but there is this idea that if you really truly love something, you want it to be the best version of itself. And that for me is often what I come back to is, I would like to believe that we're all out there trying to be the very best versions of ourselves. And our journalism, when we examine and shine a light on possible wrongdoing, is a way for someone who truly loves their team to make their team better. It doesn't always translate like that, and I get a lot of tweets back about why I'm a terrible human being, but that is ultimately what I'm thinking when I'm doing stories like these.
And I know we talked about that as well, you know, just about the idolization, right? The adulation of these athletes or these teams, right? And you kind of touched on it a bit, but can you go a little bit deeper? Like, who are your readers? And I mean, you said that, you know, people say, why are you doing this? But like, can you talk about that?
I mean, at ESPN, we'd like to believe everybody is a fan of some team, and they're coming to our organization to find out sports scores and to learn more about their favorite players, and in my case, find out what's potentially happening behind the scenes. So, you know, there's all kinds of research out there. Coming from local television, we were often told by consultants that our typical demographic, and it was varied from market to market that I worked in, and even station to station I worked in, was typically a woman between 25 and 45 years old who was making a lot of the business decisions and was the one, you know, worrying about schools. And I mean, I can go on and on. You all have probably heard a lot of this research. Well, I get to ESPN, it's a very different demographic. I mean, it's a lot of people, and it's a lot of men. And I find that, having, you know, worked in a certain mindset for much of my career, I find that interesting and challenging. But there's also women out there. And so I come at it from my reader, or my audience is the fan. I particularly like consumer-oriented stories about how can we make it a little safer, or how to keep you from getting ripped off, or how to buy the best version of something for the least amount of money. You know, I like that stuff. And so I always speak to this mantra of, I'm out there for the fan. I'm looking out for the fan. I'm looking out for people. Exactly to what Marissa spoke to. I mean, I think we're all driven by that. We're looking out for people.
Well, I think that's a great way to bring you into the conversation. I mean, can you talk about, you talk to people and you get their trust, and you get them to share things that, you know, how do you get people to trust you to share like some of the most raw, you know, painful, you know, moments that they've had to deal with?
You'd think that'd be an easy question. I think it's always a little bit different. In general, though, I think that it's about communicating, and it's about being very transparent about what you're working on and why you want to talk to them. You know, oftentimes I'm asking people about some of the absolute worst moments in their lives, and so I need to explain to them why I would be asking them to share something so deeply personal. It's also about me giving them an opportunity to ask me questions. So in every interview that I do, before I ask a single question, I ask them, do you have any questions for me? And give them an opportunity to raise concerns that maybe I did not know could be a concern. You know, as an example, to kind of help you guys understand what I'm talking about, I asked that question, do you have any questions for me? And the person said, no, you know, but I just want to say up front, I'll answer any question that you have. But please, when you're writing it, don't mention anything about my hair, because that's a trigger for me. And that's something I never would have known, that never would have come up in the conversation if I hadn't opened that door to say, let's have an open dialogue and let's make sure that you feel comfortable. And so much of the work that I'm doing is it's not about just doing the interview and thank you, have a nice day. It's an ongoing conversation that happens before the interview, during the interview, and after the interview, and oftentimes after publication as well.
I'm in touch with some of the folks that I've done these same similar difficult moments in their life, and it's a commitment for a very long period of time. When the story's over, doesn't mean that your communication with that individual is over. They gave you a tremendous amount of their trust, and I'm thinking of a specific story right now at the top of my head. I still have communication, text exchange, regular dialogue with someone, not because there's a story coming up, not because I necessarily think there will be a follow, there might be one day, but just because. Folks will share things with us that they haven't shared with their mother, their spouse, their best friend, in part because we're not those people. We are someone that's coming who's a totally clean slate. I've had so many mothers in particular say to me, everybody, says, how are you doing? And I have to say, I'm okay. But I'm not okay. But society wants me to be okay. And even though it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years after a child has died, they will actually thank me at the end of it because they could finally get so much off of their chest that is just not what they're supposed to say when they're with their friends and family and priests and counselors and whoever. We are those people sometimes. So I would encourage anyone who's afraid of that kind of interview to not be afraid that you may actually be providing an opportunity that someone is desperately wanting but has never been given the option.
I just want to add real quick that in speaking with people, especially who've been through traumatic events and who you want to talk to you, I have found that the worst thing that you can say to a person, especially to open, is, I know how you feel. Don't say that. Even if you've been through a similar situation, everyone sort of handles things differently. And so it's important to not try to put yourself on the same level as like a way to relate. I think it's a whole lot easier to relate by not putting yourself on the same level and saying, I don't know what you're going through. I really want to talk to you. And things like that, because otherwise you will immediately lose trust.
So Steve, while we have you, what do you see the role of data journalism in sports reporting?
So I see the role of data journalism in sports reporting the same way I see the role of data in everything, is I'm sort of the context adder. You find really good anecdotes, and I go in and I tell you how often it's happening. And that can often be really powerful because when you can say, hey, you see this really terrible thing that's happening? I found 100 more times where it is also happening. It can really open the eyes of a reader. It can open the eyes of people to say, this is not, the journalist didn't find the only person in this scenario, and they're trying to paint it as like a systemic problem. My job is to tell readers whether or not it is systemic. And so a lot of my job is incredibly tedious. It's combing through public records. It's filing records requests for data. It's cleaning data. It is all of that. But then at the end of the day, we can get these really good numbers that can really help back up a story and make it takes an A story to an A+. It can make those, it can put, when you put the anecdotes in context, it makes the story really shine. And so I think it's worth the work, and I think there's this perception of journalists that we don't know how to do math, and sure, a lot of people in this industry don't know how to do math, and that's part of why I'm employed where I'm at. But even knowing none of the math that I do is high level. Most of it is just counting things, and so I encourage you to try to add data to whatever, it's a sports story or anything else, because it can really help readers understand scope.
Because you've said that data journalism is 80% journalism and 20% data.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people for a long time have seen data journalists as sort of not journalists, but the reality is, in order to be a good data journalist, you have to be a good journalist. You have to be able to know the questions to ask. You need to know the holes. You need to know how to bulletproof it. You need to know all of that. And
How people lie.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think a lot of the thing that I will leave you with on data is that data isn't perfect. A lot of data is really bad, and so it's important that for me to understand how I can use the data and how and what might be missing, what's not there. I mean, the main example that I'll give you outside of the sports realm is that the Washington Post is now in its 8th year of counting fatal shootings by police. And the reason we do that is because the FBI keeps that data, but it's a huge undercount. They haven't counted more than 450 fatal shootings in a year, and each of the past 7 years, we've gone well over 900. So it's one of those things where you need to understand where the data will lie to you, and it's because the data is not this...
Imperfect.
Well, it's not.
Or perfect.
It's made by people, and people put errors in it. I mean, the biggest thing that you'll find as data is just people have fat fingers and they type things in wrong. Like it's just part of my job
all
is
do it.
is fixing that.
Yep.
And so yeah.
Yep. Think of how many typos you make and then try to put data in. Truly.
Right.
Well, I think to what Steven's saying too, though, I mean, everyone wishes they had a Steven on their team, or specifically this Steven on their
for
team.
real.
But every single journalist should have that same data mindset of, how often does this happen? What records could I find that could help me understand what's going on here? And so even if you don't have the incredible technical skills that he has, you should still be thinking about, in every story that you're doing, kind of the bigger picture.
And just to follow on that thought process, I've done a lot of journalism where I am my own data. I'm going through records and creating my own database, which is why I was kind of smirking about fat fingers, because before you assign motives to people, whether they be benign or malicious, you need to sort of self-examine. And when you go back and look at your own data, I mean, I hope if you ever create your own database, you put yourself through the same processes that you would put any other individual through, because we're human and you need to check and double check and triple check, just like you'd fact check everything else. Data is no different. I mean, we talk about it, all three of us are data reporters. He's just the most spectacular version of it. Times a million, trillion, thousand, billion. But you interview your data. So just like you would interview a person, and you have to figure out what's really going on there. What are the motives? Am I being told the truth? What else are they leaving out? All the things you would do in a confrontational interview, you would hopefully be doing with your data. But also sometimes recognizing people just make mistakes.
I also think, when it comes to writing about data, in addition to all of the gathering of it, saying what you don't know or what may not be in there is just as important, if not more important, than just what you do have.
Yeah, that's tremendous advice.
Yeah, literally the best piece of advice I got from a guy at the Post who just retired was, don't write around holes in your story. You need to disclose what you don't know, because it's important. You can't just pretend that this potential caveat that could exist doesn't.
And I think if you're starting out in this business, you have to use that in everything. A mistake that can be made is this fear that you're fraudulent, and so you have to act like you know what's going on. But if you don't understand what's going on, you need to say, what is happening here, or I don't understand, or can you explain this again? Because if you don't get it, several things are going to happen. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to make an assumption that might be the end of your career. And if you aren't asking those questions, that means there's a lot of other people out there who are probably equally confused. So there's nothing to be ashamed of or afraid of to say, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I work in a business where there are folks who can recite, every World Series winner from 1902 to the present. I don't pretend to be that person, and I never come into a story trying to prove to anyone my knowledge base. If anything, still 20 years in, I'm coming into a story, wait, what? Who, what, where, when, why, how? I mean, truly, there's a reason we were taught that in high school. And I think just coming in clean and not being embarrassed for not understanding is a powerful thing any reporter should and always be doing.
I was just going to say, playing dumb is an undervalued resource for a journalist, because
Columbo method.
Make them explain everything
Yeah.
to you. It's also a good way to catch people lying when you do know what you are asking about. I love going into interviews knowing more than they do.
Always.
and asking them those basic questions to see if they'll lie to me about it.
It's fun being underestimated.
I can't encourage that enough. I mean, there are multiple moments in my past that, you know, honey, let me explain this to you, or darling, sweetheart, oh, honey, this is blah, 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 blah. And then, you know, well, then why did you say in this email, right? So you want to go in over-prepared, but you don't need to brag about it. It's helpful to not brag about it.
I'm curious, and we've mentioned it, there's a lot going on in the sports world right now.
Yes.
There's the NFL, there's the Olympics. I mean, we could go on forever, but I'm just curious to hear from each of you, what are some of the big storylines that you think are coming up in the
Boy.
world of sports?
Marissa, you can go first.
Oh, yeah, make Marissa go first.
Maybe go first.
Jeez.
Go for it. You can take any answer you want.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't have like a specific topic, and why would I give you my story ideas anyway?
Just for 100 of your closest friends.
Just for, yeah, we're all close friends. You guys are gonna take it, right? But you know, I would say for me, what I'm personally interested in goes back to what I said in the beginning, which is always stories about people and how things affect people, whether it's policies, whether it's money, whether it's decisions. Those are the things that I personally am interested in, both as a journalist and as a reader or watcher.
As like my form of journalism, I'm most fascinated by decentralized things where there isn't like a central place of knowledge that you can sort of quantify things and that you can do that. That's why I've always been interested in the police, because there's 18,000 police departments in this country and no one collects data on all of them. And so one of the areas of sports that I have previously covered was Olympic sports before they created the Safe Sport program, which now combines all of the banned lists. But one of the places that I'm interested in is youth sports. Youth sports are a very decentralized area. A lot of the people who coach in them are not particularly certified to do so, because there are no requirements to do so, and that leads to problems. And so I'm interested in sort of that from the who's coaching these kids perspective, but also the what is in place to keep kids safe, whether it's in youth football or anything like that. I think that youth sports is a very undercovered area because people are just like, well, I just take my kids to that, and they don't think twice about it.
I agree. Youth sports, I think, is uncharted territory. I mean, we try to do as much as we can, but there's just, if you're a local reporter, you ought to be looking at youth sport leagues because there's so many possibilities of things. To his point, it's decentralized. It's not very well regulated. I think overarching themes recently, I think we are living in a moment right now that is a reckoning that has been a long time coming for women in sports. I think Marissa's reporting actually jump-started it. I think it started because of Marissa's journalism. And I just want folks to understand 100 years from now, we'll still be talking about what Marissa and her colleagues did. And I don't know if we can say that with a lot of other things that this group of people have reported on, because it was a moment for my generation and the generations before me where women's sports has lived in a certain type of culture, and we all learned to put up with it, and we all learned to move forward, and a lot of things got swept under the rug. And you can see what's happening in women's soccer, you can see what's happening in gymnastics, in cheer, you can see swimming. You name a sport that women were allowed to participate in up until just recently, and there's a huge reckoning happening with coaches, toxic work environments. I think in professional sports that have long been dominated by men, there's a real reckoning happening right now for something that just because it was doesn't mean it should be, with sexual harassment and the treatment of female employees, which is part of a larger Me Too movement. But sports is finally having this moment, and I think it's an important one, and I think this will be remembered for a long time as part of a larger movement for women. At the same time, I think right now, as of last week, the NFL is having a reckoning with racial politics and coaches, And I think that's going to be a big conversation that could have widespread discussion and repercussion throughout the community. I think that's something to watch and will continue to be a big storyline. I think also the globalization of sports. What's happening right now in the Olympics with China is this idea of how sports brands, sports companies are intersecting in international politics. And you look at what's happening with human rights in China and how that intersects with business is an interesting space in sports. And I think a lot of journalism will continue to come out of there. And then finally, I personally am really interested in technology and how it is rapidly changing, because often sports and entertainment is at the very forefront of that. And what, again, coming back to the fan, what that is going to mean for me when I try to watch or interact or attend my favorite sporting event, because I think it's a window into where the whole universe is headed. Sports is often at the very forefront. I think it's interesting, basketball with NBA was where we finally took COVID seriously as a nation. And the NBA, we now realize, looking back at it, was very aware of what was coming with COVID. And there's a reason. They had to be in chart, they had to be ahead of it. Mm-hmm. Sports is the canary in the coal mine, I guess.
Yes.
And once again, often goes underestimated.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that and you single out the NBA because, you know, we're about to come up on the 10-year anniversary for the death of Trayvon Martin.
Yep.
And so we're about to do an interview with you know, an NBA star who was the first person to really make a statement. And like in looking back at it, we're looking at the Black Lives Matter movement, and it took the NBA, you know, to be the first person to come out. And so they are, well, really it was the WNBA, but you know,
it's the
the
WNBA.
Right.
I'm fascinated. I think the WNBA is a fascinating league to watch. I've done a lot of journalism about the WNBA in the last year, and that's another just sort of league I would pay attention to, because it's the intersection of all of these things I just mentioned: globalization of sports, social justice movement, women in a sports space, money. It's fascinating watching all of that come together with the WNBA, and that is a league that's often been an oversight. It's been passed over, but it is having a reckoning right now. I just think we're in a very interesting time in sports. It's fascinating to be in this world right now.
So I'm going to ask one question to each of you, and then, you know, we've been talking for about 40 minutes, so I'm really excited to hear. And Mitchell, I've been thinking about you and what your project, and I hope that you'll have a question. And then there was a young lady who was just so moved by you, and she came and talked to you in the restroom, so I hope she's out there, and I hope she has a question. But I guess, I mean, my question to everyone before, so guys have your questions in their mics at both sides. Why do you do what you do?
This is going to sound really cliche, so I'm just going to, my disclaimer up front, but, you know, I mean, what keeps me going is the hope for change and for exposing something that's wrong in the hopes that it will be made right. And this work can be incredibly, incredibly difficult to do, but also incredibly rewarding. And when I say rewarding, I don't necessarily mean the traditional journalistic sense of like an award, but in terms of the humanity piece of it. And of, you know, I've done stories that most people probably don't care about years later, but it really, really mattered to the people that it was about. And that's what keeps me going and why I stay in this profession.
Right, because it's not and we were talking about this is not a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 gig at all, by any stretch of the
That's like
imagination.
the half day.
Right.
Not encouraging that behavior, I just want to be clear about that.
I mean, I'll give you the real answer, and then I'll give you the nice side effect of it. I mean, the real answer is this is basically the same as Marissa's. Like, there's nothing better than the feeling of changing something that's wrong with your journalism. I mean, it's one of the reasons I got into it. It is tough in many ways to change systems, but journalism is one of the very few ways in which you can have a major impact. And I have, like, it's the thing that draws me to specifically to investigative reporting, is when we can do something and on the other end of it, a thing changes for the better for people. The nice side effect of it is I've come to realize that I really enjoy when people hate me, but also respect the work that I do. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, I like when I bring something to somebody and it exposes something and they're mad at me about it, but they also have nothing to come back with because they know it's true. And so that is just like a nice side effect. But but really, like, I do love when the people who are like, it's the afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. It's like, I really like, it's not even afflicting the comfortable part. I like the comforting the afflicted part. Like, I really enjoy making sure that people who don't have a voice or who have never had a voice finally get their day in the sunlight, and it makes things better for them and better for people like them.
So I come from a family of reporters. Just to put it in perspective, I have a mom, 2 grandfathers, an uncle, an aunt, a cousin, a grandmother, a great-grandfather, and potentially a great-great-grandfather. And another great-grandfather, who are all journalists. So I don't ever do anything that's particularly remarkable at the dinner table. It's sort of like, yeah, okay, yeah, we know about that. Anyway, let's talk about something more interesting, like architecture or something. And so my mom is not necessarily going to be super excited that I'm on television, because she did that already. And I have come to realize recently with Wordle that I have a contrarian personality and that I won't play Wordle because everyone else is playing Wordle. I never watched Titanic because everyone watched Titanic. I'm starting to realize this about myself 20 years in, which makes me a great investigative reporter. I was at the University of Missouri. I'm a better investigative, not a great, better investigative reporter. I was at the University of Missouri, and I had a professor, and we were at a press conference, and everybody, the gaggle, was following the senator on the campaign trail, and they were all doing what they were supposed to be doing. And my professor was turning around and looking at what was over there. And I realized that's who I want to, that's who I want to be. I want to be looking over there. I want to be looking at the things that get forgotten, that get overlooked, that get swept under the rug. I like the puzzle of it. I didn't think I was going to be a reporter. I didn't write for the school paper. I didn't write for my undergrad newspaper. I did some internships. I thought it was kind of interesting, but it was the family business, and I was being contrarian, and I was going to be an architect. And I was at a rugby game, and I watched this family come up to my mother, and it had been 25 years since she had done a story, and they started crying, telling her how important her journalism was, and that it had finally given them answers about why their daughter had been hurt by our product, and that they had never been able to understand it. And it was my mom who gave them clarity and understanding and stopped it from happening again. And that was the moment for me. I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it, that it mattered. It really matters. And if you do your job right, no one knows, because someone didn't die, someone didn't get hurt, someone didn't get raped, someone didn't get sexually harassed, someone didn't get ripped off. They never had it happen to them because you did your job. And your reward is when it stops happening. And you're not going to get accolades for that. You're not going to get money for that. You're not going to have anyone clap for you. If anything, people will just gripe and moan and be annoyed at you. But you can, 25 years later, hopefully have a family that comes up to you and says, thank you. You made a difference in our life. And that is ultimately what drives me. It doesn't matter if it's sports or anything else. I think at the end of the day, when you look back at what have I accomplished in my life, and I have this perspective, even though I'm only halfway through my career, hopefully, I have this perspective because I've watched grandparents and aunts and uncles and parents. I've watched their careers, and what do you have when it's all said and done? What do people remember? What do you remember? What really matters when it's all done? And that's what I want to matter, is that I helped somebody. I made the world a little bit better than the way they found it. Whether they recognize it or not, I know in my heart of hearts that I did the right thing.
Amen.
Amen.
Who has a question? Mitchell. I kind of put you on the spot. Sorry. Are the mics are on, right? Okay. Yeah.
All right. First off, thank you guys so much for coming. My question is kind of such a huge part of investigative journalism is digging and asking people questions. And I think, especially from a student's perspective at my age, it's really easy to feel like when you're kind of probing for information to feel like an annoyance, and like it's really hard to talk to people of such higher status and that like you don't really deserve to be taking up their time. So I was kind of wondering for you guys coming out of college, how you guys kind of got over that hump of feeling comfortable to be able to be like, this is my position, I deserve to be able to ask these people these questions, because I think it's really easy to feel like you don't matter to these people and that you are an annoyance, if that makes sense to you guys.
Oh, yeah. Why do you keep looking at me?
I thought you were
thinking.
answering. I'm sorry. I mean, for me, I think it's, to some people you are going to be an annoyance and you are going to be below their stature because that's how they are, but they're people. Everybody's people. And so, like, you just need to go in with that. And if you're bringing all of the information, it's their job to dispute it. And if they want to, like, go like this, you're still going to write about it. Like, a no comment is the same thing as giving an interview. Like, a no comment doesn't mean we don't write a story. And so you just, like, one of the things is you just have to treat these people like the human beings that they are. They're not inherently better because they have a high position in government, in a company, wherever you're reporting. And so for me, it's just, you have to just be ready for them to not like you. Like, it's part of the job. It's unfortunate, but like, it's going to happen. And as long as you're going in there with the truth and you're just trying to get the truth from them, that's what we have to do.
Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. So I would hope.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time. We're all the same. And they might be the richest, wealthiest, most famous person, and I hope and pray that you treat them with the same respect and courtesy and seriousness and intensity that you would treat someone who potentially is mentally ill and homeless on the street. We should always give everyone a chance to speak their piece. You being a college student, you're bringing your own, you're bringing your own self to that situation and your worries and your concerns. It will be different later. It'll be some other reason why you feel uncomfortable walking into that room. I would be lying if I told you I don't feel uncomfortable walking into rooms. Part of that is learning to say to yourself, I have a right to be here, I should be here, and what I'm doing is important and it matters. And I should be in this room, and I can take this seat. And I say this to you all, not just for journalism. I mean, I've had business folk tell me that if there's an empty seat, sit down in it until someone tells you to get out of it. No matter what you look like, no matter what gender you are, no matter how old or young you are, take a seat at the table, because most people are afraid to. And if you're brave enough to take a seat at the table, if you're brave enough to go to the meeting, if you're brave enough to make the phone call, what's the worst thing that happens? They hang up on you? That felt bad. Okay, they hung up on you. They didn't like your question. They yelled at you. They're not yelling at you. It's not a person. It's really hard in the beginning to realize this isn't about you, right? That this isn't personal. And if it's getting personal, you need to ask yourself why you're still working on it. That being said, I will say this. When you're younger and you're first starting out, and I'm speaking from experience, I don't think you might necessarily always understand the ramifications of a story. A single story has the power to destroy someone's life. So you need to take every story very seriously, because you have power in the written word and in the spoken word on the platform that you've been given to change the course of things. And if you don't take that responsibility very seriously and you look at it as just another story, just another deadline, I'm just trying to get through my day because I got to go to this place later, or I got to go see my family, I got to go to the bar, whatever, you need to take a step back and remember this is serious stuff for some of these folks. And sometimes I remember as a college student, I'd get kind of that blowback that I didn't really understand the ramifications of what I was trying to do because I was trying to get a grade in a class. But I still, you still got to pick up the phone and you got to keep trying. And you're never going to be perfect. There is no perfect story. I can look back at everything and be like, I wish I had said that, or I wish I'd done that better, I wish I'd asked that person, I wish I'd written that line, ooh, I needed to tweak that, That's what I love about the job, is that it is a perpetual education. I'm always learning something new. I don't get bored in this job because there's always something I don't know.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Does someone else have a question? Emma?
Yeah, so all of you touched on how creating change is one of the most rewarding parts of your job, and Tisha, you told that story about your mother. So I'm just wondering, has there been like a certain moment in your careers, like either a change you created or a source you talked to that made you kind of feel that all your hard work was worth it?
Yes. So when I was an intern at the Washington Post, I worked on this project for basically the entire time that I was there that I still think is the most impactful story I've ever done. And also, when I say it to you, you're going to fall asleep. It was on tax lien sales in the District of Columbia. And what that means in layman's terms was if you didn't pay your property taxes, the district could sell it to a private investor who could jack up fees, take you to court, and then take your home and all the value in it. And we found this program that was incredibly predatory, and it wasn't like, I think the hardest thing about the project was how do you convince people to be sympathetic to people who didn't pay their taxes? Well, the lead of the first story was a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran with dementia who bought his house after his wife died of cancer, and he used the money to buy the house outright for the first time in his life. And he forgot to make one payment of $120, and they took his home over it. And it was all because he didn't know. He had no idea he was being sucked into this system. And in the aftermath of that, the district changed the laws so that, one, they don't sell liens that are that small anymore. Two, if you do lose your home to this, you get 90% of the value. And three, retroactively, they settled with a bunch of people who lost their homes to get them the value of their homes. And so essentially with him, it was one of those moments where it's like, oh, I not only made it better for him, I made it better for people. I made it so that people can't be him in the future. And like that to me was one of those things where no award can match up to that feeling, like the getting things corrected that are wrong. And it doesn't happen all the time. A lot of time, I work on a lot of national projects. Congress doesn't do much. And so sometimes you just can't, but like when it happens, it's great. And that's why I love local journalism, because it's a whole lot easier to get things done at that level.
Yes, also, I don't want to pick just one, though, so I won't bore you guys, but I just, I think similar to what Stephen was talking about, for me, it's not the external accolades, that the things that make it feel rewarding to me are the text message after publication saying, thank you for hearing me, or that's the first time that I felt myself represented, or that I felt heard. It's those moments that make it worth the time and worth all of the work and the challenges that we sometimes face in doing this work. Those are the things that keep me going.
Again, to both of their points, sometimes they're very small victories, sometimes they're huge victories, like what he's talking about. I mean, there have been bridges that have been replaced, and I take great pleasure watching this one particular bridge from my very first job that they blew up because it was so dangerous, and that's right, there goes that bridge. It's time to get rid of it. You know, there are things like that. And during the housing crisis of 2008, I did a lot of journalism that helped get rid of some subprime loan issues. I mean, there's different levels. I was thinking about what Stephen was saying. I still live in the District of Columbia. I do business in DC. And many years ago, I did a story, and one element was how we were able to show that the metal detectors in all the government buildings weren't being calibrated. And so you could walk in with guns into the police department or wherever, and you thought you were going through a metal detector, but they weren't working, and nobody was dealing with it. And we did a test. We put lead weights into boots and walked through all these metal detectors based on a tip we'd gotten. And we showed that you could walk in with all this lead and no one was going to stop you. So every time I walk through a metal detector in DC and my boots go off, I love it. I love it. I love getting stopped at metal detectors. It makes me really happy because that means it's working. That's what I'm saying. It's small victories. I guess we might have won awards. I can't even remember the awards. I can't, but I remember the medal, you know? That's what I mean. Those are the things you remember. And you remember the people. You really remember. You remember the stories and you remember the people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You right there, yes.
Hi, you guys mentioned the NFL, obviously it's a huge entity. With the Flores lawsuit, obviously there's going to be a lot of investigations coming out. Same happened when there was the concussion studies. With such a huge entity, is there a chance to really be proactive about stuff, or do you have to kind of react to people coming out and saying things? This is a way to delve into things and find out stuff before somebody comes out?
Boy. Yes, I would like to believe journalism begets journalism begets journalism. To my point with Marissa's journalism, I'm doing journalism that is a direct, I can point to the dominoes that what I'm doing this week wouldn't have happened without what Marissa and her team did. Because we're all on the same team. I mean, we really are. Like, that was something we were talking about last night, is we're all on the same team. We're all trying to do, as you can hear, there's a common theme here. So with the concussions, and forgive me, those are my colleagues at ESPN who really did that initial journalism. So I don't want to speak for them because it's a long tail. But their journalism is why you know about concussions. Nobody was talking about it. The NFL wasn't talking about it, but they were talking about it. I think with the Flores lawsuit, that's an example of something that if you talk to an awful lot of my colleagues, they've been reporting on for years. And if you talk to Black coaches, they have been, I mean, I've done interviews with the nonprofit group that's been pushing for something more than the Rooney Rule. And it's not a new conversation, but Flores has brought it, right? And that's why we're talking about it, is he's bringing insider knowledge and it's coming out into the public. So it's a combination. It's a combination of diligent reporting. It's a combination of very brave individuals willing to come forward with their stories. Flores has taken a lot of risks with this. Just like the women who came to Marissa took incredible risks with what they're doing. So yeah, I would like to believe that we're not doing stories because we're trying to make a ruckus. We're doing stories because we are trying to be proactive. We're trying to get ahead of something. You can't wait around for most groups to fix themselves. I hate to say it. I wish it wasn't that way. Sometimes they get ahead of the ball. But yeah, that's what we're here for. That's what pays our bills.
One thing that I will say is that the longer you do journalism and the better you get at it, the easier it is to actually find stories, because if people trust you, they come to you. And so the key to getting those stories before they end up in a lawsuit is to just become sort of the go-to person. They know that you get things done. They know that you will write the story and you will write it truthfully. And, you know, that makes life easier because obviously, like, tips are great. We don't love going on fishing expeditions. Like, oh, something's wrong with the NFL. Like, cool. What? but like we get tips like that all the time, and so like it's a whole lot better to get like here's the specific thing, and so I think about that a lot. And one of the other things too is like I guarantee you that a number of people will do this, but my guess is in the Brian Flores lawsuit that a number of large media organizations will intervene to try to make as much of discovery public. I don't know if it'll work.
I'm looking at him like, really?
Why not?
Are you guys?
We probably will. That's how we got one of the bigger stories that I've done, which was we intervened in a case against opioid distributors, and we got data that the DEA had denied us for years. And so, I think that those are like going to try to even if they don't, like you want to comb court cases are just
Court cases.
gold mine.
That's what I was about to say. Is I wish I understood the power of a court case earlier in my career. You learn to FOIA, and it's very addictive when you get some great documents. But there are court cases just sitting out there, and learning how to use PACER. I'm going to tell you one word. Go look it up. Scoop is a fabulous. Yeah, it's just it's awesome. Taking advantage of court cases, because you can get a lot of what's in a FOIA that takes a year or two to get right away if you just go look for the court case and you stay on top of the court case. That is one of the ways around the wall. A lot of what you learn about the NFL comes through court cases, because we as the people have a right to know what's happening in a courtroom.
The other thing I would add to what they've said, which I think is all amazing advice, is the importance of sourcing. So, you could talk about the NFL, but talk about any topic. And the first thing that I'm doing when I'm starting a major investigation is I'm making a list of all of the types of people, so not specific people, but types of people that may touch on a particular issue. And I'm contacting as many people as possible for informal conversations, not formal interviews where I'm asking them a list of questions. I'm just calling them and saying, hey, I'm interested in this topic, let's say gymnastics. I'm interested in gymnastics, what are you paying attention to right now? What do you think I should be looking at? Where should I be looking for records? And I'm making that same list about what records might be available. So, court records are an amazing tool for all of the work that we do. So are police records, so are,
Zoning hearings.
Yeah, I mean,
We've been joking about zoning hearings, but zoning hearings got a lot of dirt in them.
I mean, the reality is, think about all of the touch points. If you're thinking about an organization or you're thinking about an individual, and what are all of the touch points and records that might be available on that person or organization, and requesting those to give you that picture. And when, going back to sourcing, the best way to get at the front end of it is to get it before anybody else gets it, and that's by building trust in the long term. It's not by a cold phone call. Maybe this works for some people, it never works for me, but maybe you can call someone and say, hey, would you give me this thing, and they give it to you. In general, I've built relationships, and I'm calling before I need something, just to have a conversation.
This is not sports, but it's totally applicable. We have a colleague, we belong to an organization called IRE, Investigative Reporters and Editors, and you can tell we obviously know each other fairly well, and that's how we all know each other. I went to a panel some years ago, and I recommend anyone who wants to take investigative reporting go to the national conference. It is a powerful experience. It's worth the money. It's worth the time. And it was some years ago, the guy who broke all of the stories on terrorism, every single terrorism story that really has mattered for one of the major publications. It was supposed to be an interview it was supposed to be a panel on interviewing, and he brought an FBI agent with him who had just retired, who was like essential to cracking where Osama bin Laden had been hiding. And he had just retired, and so he was able, were you guys in this panel? This was the most spectacular panel. And I'm telling this story because the reporter ended up revealing that he had gone for like the last 10 years to every single retirement party for every single FBI agent in his area. And he had done it a long time before he needed information. He goes to the retirement parties. He goes to the birthday parties. He goes to the bar. He's not asking them questions. He doesn't want information. He's putting his face in front of them and building trust. And that is a huge investment of time, but he broke all the stories down the road. So source development, to your whole point, I mean, you can't report on the bridge after it's fallen. You need to understand what's wrong with the bridge before it falls. You need to understand the data before you need to use it. You need to know your sources before you need them. They're not going to tell you anything because they don't know you.
So I just want to add to that. I mean, this is like a state secret, so I apologize to the
To the whole room.
yeah. The best place, one of the best places to find sources is go to LinkedIn and search for people who have recently left the
Yeah.
place you are looking at.
Yeah.
It is a wonder. Like a lot of them will have left under good circumstances, but some of them won't. And if you're already investigating them, the company that they worked for, those people may know who's there that can specifically talk about it, and they're more open to talk about it because their jobs aren't on the line anymore. And so, you never know. Also, a lot more people than you think leave with stuff.
And a lot more people will talk to you than you think you will. Never assume that someone won't talk to you. There have been people who have sat down for interviews that if I would have hazarded a guess, I never would have expected that they would have talked to me. And they
Again,
probably shouldn't have.
The worst thing that can happen is they say no or they hang up on you. That's as bad as it gets. And it's not a great feeling, but that's as bad as it gets.
These are great examples, right? LinkedIn, retirement parties.
I think I called 50 people who used to work at a team, and I finally got someone to talk to me
Right.
using exactly that technique.
And you guys had the zoning hearings, and that reminded me, and that's why I went to my tablet, because I do remember that was one of the things that came up in our prep call, is like, how do you find these nuggets, these stories? It's the zoning hearings, it's going to LinkedIn, that's genius, going to the retirement party for every FBI agent.
I remember being like, oh, of course you're breaking all these stories.
Right.
Of course. And he wasn't just doing it with the FBI, he was doing it with every police officer. Now, if you're covering your local police beat, you need to know all the police officers, but you also need to know, and this I think is really important in this current culture, you need to know the community in which those police officers are working. My former boss, Dwayne Bray, was from the neighborhoods that he was covering. So we got to know the police beat, but he knew the people in the community that were on the other side of it. And you got to know all the sides. You got to talk to I think it now seems so obvious in this current climate we're in. But there was a time where what the police said was gospel. Yeah.
Taking that a step, when I started my career, I started at a local paper. And the first thing I would do when I would move into a new job at a new paper is I would go to every boring meeting that there was. And I wasn't doing it because I thought some great story was going to come out of the meeting. All the interesting stories usually don't come out of meetings. But what it was doing was showing them that I was invested in what was going on, and I was putting my face in front of them, and I was building that trust over time. And, eventually after the Board of Zoning Appeals, all of the members of the board would go to a local restaurant after, and I would just go and sit there, and you're building that rapport, and you're investing in, as you were saying, Tisha, understanding the community that you're writing about. And that's how ultimately those stories, you want to be the person that when they have something that's going wrong or that they're thinking about, you want to be the person that they think about. Like, who I could trust with this? Tisha, Stephen, Marissa. And that's kind of it's the long game.
Yeah, and I think the long game is super important because there may come times where it's called burning a source or blowing up an embargo, or, you've been given information in a trusting relationship, and there's the possibility that someone is going to beat you to the punch, but it will require you to break trust with whoever your source or information is. And I don't think it's worth it. We're in it for the long game. I mean, we're here for bigger reasons than being first or winning the award, right? And I don't break embargo, and I try real hard never to burn a source. Again, coming back to this amazing panel at IRE that was like fascinating, the guy who covers terrorism said he often knew what the name of the terrorist or suspected terrorist was, and like, you know, I can't remember if it was the Boston Marathon, but a situation like that, like he knew the name, but he purposely waited until he knew at least 100 other people inside the FBI and the local police department knew the name to protect his source. So he was way out ahead, and he knew he might get beat, but the protection of his source was more important than being first. So that is all part of that's experience, that's learning, that's creating trust. You don't just have these things handed to you on a silver platter, and if you do, you need to ask questions. Why? Right. Are you being used? Is there an ulterior motive?
And not to put Sarah on the spot, but Sarah and I were based in Los Angeles together for years, and I remember Sarah, one of the bigger stories that she covered was Ferguson and what was going on, and for months, and I'm sure to this day, Sarah was taking calls at 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and I'm like, Sarah, like they're blowing your phone up, and it's the same thing. It was, you know, the long game, and you know, and just building that trust with people, and knowing that if they called Sarah, they knew that they could trust her, but they knew that she was going to do something about it as well.
And I'm not going to lie, it's a lot of work, mentally, physically, emotionally, and you learn to build walls, and you learn to build barriers, and you learn how to protect yourself, and but I obviously think it's worth it.
Who has a question? Oh, I'm sorry. There you are.
You're fine. Hi, my name is Samantha Latson, and you all talked about the power of journalism and just shedding light on wrongdoing. And so regarding the recent NFL case on discrimination employment, is it going to be up to journalists to force the NFL to change? I know some may say, well, we've seen this before with Colin Kaepernick. You know, that was a moment, but it was just business as usual. The culture really didn't change. So is it going to be up for journalists to not let up and make sure this conversation continues on?
I think that journalists play a role, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's not our job to advocate, it's our job to expose what's wrong. It's the public's job to advocate. And I think where you see change happen, you know, using as an example the difference between gymnastics and cheerleading, we talked about this yesterday. You know, I've written about misconduct in both entities, and the difference between the changes that have happened in gymnastics and are still happening in gymnastics versus cheerleading was the will of the people to say this is enough and I demand better. And so I think that and that's kind of an extreme example, but when I think back to a lot of the work that I've done, what was the difference between actual change happening and no change was the public demanding better and demanding different.
I think sports is an interesting segment of journalism because there is a tradition in sports journalism that is different from traditional news reporting in that there is a very strong discipline and history of opinion commentary in sports journalism, where a writer is giving their opinion about how a particular player played, and then that can transition very quickly to giving an opinion about a decision that a GM or an owner has made or a league has made. And I have found, and this is me generalizing and very generalizing, that there's two kinds of journalism in sports. There are folks like me who are presenting facts and what people have said or done or documents show or trends that we're seeing. And then there is a group of journalists who take that information and they do have more of an advocacy role. So just because of what I've done for so long and because of the nature of investigative journalism in particular, I tend to be fact-oriented and not as advocacy-oriented, recognizing there's a whole host of people out there that will potentially take my journalism and then push for change with it. That's true in traditional news. You're seeing more and more of it. With the advent of the internet and Google and the ability to look up a sports score or to see what's happening in real time with a clip of video, you don't have to wait until the 6 o'clock news to be informed anymore, or you don't have to wait for the morning paper. So a lot of television news has moved to something that you can't easily Google, which is more of this commentary, analysis, and opinion journalism. And so I think there is a place for it, but it's not what I do. I'm giving you facts. I'm giving you information. And then people, whether they be commentators or folks in the community or coaches and players, I think with the Flores lawsuit, it'll be interesting to see, will you see a rising tide? Will you see more and more folks follow Flores's lead? I will be, or someone like me will be telling you there is another coach or there is another GM or there is another individual who is joined and is speaking out. And then there will be other journalists who will talk about it. Does that, yeah?
Yeah, I just want to really quick say that I feel like one of the big things that needs to happen in these is to contextualize them. Like, this case isn't happening in a vacuum. This isn't the first time that the NFL has had these accusations. And so it's incredibly important for journalists to put the lawsuit in the context of those other things. Like you mentioned Colin Kaepernick, and point to the fact that, like, this is not like an out of the blue thing. This is not a thing that they haven't been previously accused of. And so it is, I advocate for as much context in those spaces as possible because it's important to inform that this lawsuit didn't come out of left field.
It didn't. I mean, it's been something people have been talking about for a very long period of time.
But I guess to follow up on your question, is it our role as journalists to shine the light so that, as Marissa said, that, you know, the people say that's
Yes.
enough and I'm not going to stand for it anymore?
If there's a perceived injustice, I think, and someone wants to speak out on it, I think there's always a role for, that's what we do. We give people a platform upon which that they can expose what they consider to be unfair treatment or wrongdoing or a whole host of things. That's the whole point of what we do. I think that's what sets apart the press release, you know, press release journalism, which is a legitimate form of journalism, from what is, I would like to believe, deeper digging, because we're trying to find patterns. We're trying to find themes or systematic issues, that it's not an individual, it's something that is larger and impacts us as a community and needs to be talked about. I mean, my whole goal is to hopefully have people talk about what we find.
Steve's got a question.
Oh, sorry. Steve. Hi.
Hi, this has been really good. Good to see you, Marissa. You know, you've got CNN, USA Today, Washington Post, ESPN. What advice or words of wisdom do you have for all those journalists who are out at those little weekly, small daily papers where it's just 1, 2, maybe 3 reporters at the most, as far as what they may be able to do or accomplish while trying to get that paper out there all the time? So with fewer resources, what can they do, or what can you help them with as far as being able to do something important?
Well, that's where I started my career. I started at a very small daily newspaper, and I was very traditional in my pathway of continually moving to larger publications. And how I got into investigative reporting is I would carve out time in the middle of all of the quick turns that I needed to do. I would find an hour here or a half an hour there to chip away at the stories that I wanted to be doing and digging deeper into things. And it does take a lot of work, and it takes a lot of commitment. And I will say, for me, it took a lot of organization because I was balancing the demands of the daily grind with the longer term things. And what I found was you get to a certain point with a deeper dive story, enterprise investigative, and you can tell your boss about it then, and then you get a little bit more time. You know, so you kind of started on the side, and once you've got something, then you can kind of get that carve out time. But I think I would just say, be constantly looking for exactly what we've all been talking about, that bigger picture, that bigger context, and how you can inform and educate the public.
I did the same thing. I was the sole Nightside reporter, and my first post Missouri, I went to the University of Missouri, and I was working every day as a reporter there and a student. So my first TV job post school, I was the sole Nightside reporter. So anything that happened at night was my problem to cover. And exactly what you said, I carved out an hour or two here or there. I came in a little early. I stayed a little late. I tended to stay late when no one was around and just work on things. I don't think you can walk into your boss and say, I want to be your investigative reporter. You have to do a story that has an investigative bend to it, and then build upon that and build upon that. And you're like, well, how the heck do I do that? How would I figure out how to do that? For me, it was twofold. I took what little money I had saved and went to IRE and exposed myself to amazing journalism techniques. I learned about things like scoop and court cases and stuff like that. I basically got technical training on how to do it. And then I really would look at what other local markets were doing, and then I would try to replicate that in my market. Just because someone does it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. If anything, you should be looking to see if it's happening in your market as well. And then there's something, and don't be shy about calling that reporter and being like, how did you get that? Or where's that information coming from? I regularly reached out to more senior reporters or fellow reporters. I would always watch the award winners for whatever topic I was particularly interested in. I would also watch the finalists, and then I would try to replicate those stories. You've heard me say Bridge. I did the Bridge story, the Bridge database, in every market I worked in. And it was great journalism because bridges are in terrible shape. I'm sure you all saw a bridge just fell down in Pittsburgh. They knew about it. That should never have happened. If you aren't going and looking at your bridges and you're covering traffic, you should be looking at bridges. So look to your colleagues. We're all on the same team. And if someone doesn't help you, try again. It's probably because they're having a breaking news day. Truly. Don't ever not follow up.
I will also say quickly that I don't use Microsoft Excel all that often because I focus a lot on long-term projects, and mine is about reproducibility. But I would say that the vast majority of the work that I do can be done in Microsoft Excel, and you can learn them from online resources with relative ease. IRE has a lot of really great tip sheets on this. But if you're looking to do data, it's really not a high level for entry point unless you're trying to do high level statistical analysis, which I try not to do because I don't want to have to explain it to a reader. I mean, it's tough. You're just trying to explain probabilities and things like that, and it just ends up in a weird place.
I mean, one of the wackiest stories that I ever did, but was actually a really fascinating story. I went to an IRE presentation, and there was a reporter from Florida, Orlando, who showed how so many of the dolphins in the theme parks in that area were just living in terrible conditions, and they'd gotten in all kinds of trouble with the Department of Agriculture, which had oversight, and he had unearthed the marine mammal database. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. And I wrote him an email after his panel session, and he just gave it to me. And I was able to look at what had happened to all the dolphins in the local aquariums in the Baltimore market and I ended up telling the story of Bob the killer dolphin, who one aquarium from another aquarium to another aquarium was being transported because he was killing all the dolphins that he was hanging out with. Not a story I thought I was going to ever do in my life, but that's what I'm saying. He just handed me the database. We're all on the same team. I just can't emphasize that enough. We're all on the same team. We're competitors. I mean, Steven technically is one of my biggest competitors, but he's one of my best buddies. So we're all in it for the same reason.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Carly Van Cleve. I'm a reporter with WPTA in Fort Wayne. The Nightside reporter, you're talking about, Tish. It's a good time. So we've been covering in Fort Wayne. There's our trash company's going through bankruptcy right now. It's been a 4-year-long thing. I submitted a records request a while ago, and it was pretty detailed, talking about bankruptcy, trash, the keywords that I needed. They responded with, they said, there are no results underneath this. We have nothing like this. How do you guys handle that if you believe these powerful entities are the ones, if they're not being truthful about that, or is it a problem with my records request?
So I want to tell you one of my favorite things to do, which is to FOIA leaked documents, things that I know exist, just to see if they will tell me that it doesn't. Because a lot of times they'll do that because you don't know specifically. So I would wager you probably did it specific enough and that you probably were good and that they're avoiding it. One of the things I like to do before I file FOIA requests is to talk to somebody who's there, who knows what exists, so that I can specifically ask for those things. Like an email sent on this date from this person to this person with the subject line this. Like, I think making it so that they know for certain that you know that there is stuff has always been very important for me. It can be tough because you may not get that stuff and they may just continually say, no, we don't have this. No, we don't have that. And so you just kind of have to keep pushing. And so this may be a point at which you need to start working people within the department to find out if any of that stuff exists and if they can give you even a sample of it.
And if you're in the right agency. Because I've got to believe there's a contract between the government and the contractor providing the trash services. So at the very minimum, ask for the contract and figure out who owns the contract. When I say that, what agency has that contract? And then ask who's in charge of trash. It might be Department of Public Works, but it might be Department of Environment. It might be some other department and they may both have jurisdiction. So you may be getting the answers, we have no records, because they know right across the hallway they do, but you didn't ask them.
Any good FOIA officer will tell you when it's not under their purview, but a lot of FOIA officers just straight up they'll deny you on that basis, but won't be like, oh, hey, we're not the custodians of those records, because that could just literally be the issue you've run into.
And you have to basically cultivate sources.
I think that's the biggest thing because, maybe there's one word in your request
Yep.
that enables them to say, oh, no, we don't have that. So definitely going back.
That's what I was going to say. Just keep issuing FOIA requests and just keep changing the words and just keep going. They can't limit you to the number of FOIA requests that you submit. So just keep doing it and you'll get it at some point.
You want to go real big?
Yeah, thank you guys.
FOIA your name.
And then
Oh,
see
that's
what
And then you'll
happens.
get all the emails about what they're saying to you.
Also variants of your name because my name, as you can probably imagine, often gets misspelled.
Or that woman. So her, she, they're not dumb, but if they're forwarding your email, whatever's in that email, so your TV station, the other names that your TV station could be, and you want to do them but now you're getting into separate keyword searches, so now they're going to make it harder on you because you want so many keywords and their system doesn't do that. So try to think through all the things that they're thinking about.
I will say in Indiana, last I saw, the ruling was there were a limit to the number of keywords that you could use per request. So that guy sitting right there, Steve Key, if you're going to work in Indiana, there should be two people that become your new best friends. One of them is that guy right there. The other one is Luke Britt, who's the Indiana Public Access Counselor, who will be the person that you go to if you're denied and or there's an open door violation. He's the guy that you go to. So definitely introduce yourself to both of them.
But keep going. Don't give up.
Did you send the FOIA by email?
Yes, it was by email, electronic.
Okay,
so.
CC a colleague or an editor on there, because sometimes I've found that when they go to forward it, they'll take your name off and forget that there are other people on it. And so you can have a colleague in on the internal conversation.
That's genius.
It doesn't always work, but I have had it work more than the places would care to admit.
Thank you guys. I already submitted another, so hopefully we'll get it back.
So they're just making sure there's not one final question. Is there another question? One more? All right. Well, there are. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. There are refreshments in the back, and then let's be ready to start right at 3:15. Thank you, guys.